The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I'm Dr. James Spencer, and I am joined today by Romney Ruder. And Romney is the president of Lifeline Global Ministries, and it's a really cool ministry to men and women who are incarcerated. And so, Romney, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, talk a little bit about, just as we get into this, why don't we just start by introducing the ministry to people? Sort of, what does the ministry do? And then I want to talk about how you got into it.
Yeah, so we have been around for almost 25 years now, and we got our start at Angola State Prison down in Louisiana, who at the time was known as the deadliest prison in America. And there was a lot of work being done in that community through the church and through the administration. And one of the things that they really wanted to do is they saw transformation being happening through the Holy Spirit was how do they now take what they've learned and convey that to their families and make an impact on their families. And Malachi Dads was the result of that work. And so Malachi Dads and Hannah's Gift, which is our women's program, is really designed to engage the incarcerated mother or father to help them embrace in their walk with Christ the roles that they've been called into as part of that relationship. And that too often, when you find yourself incarcerated, sometimes you kind of come up with this mindset of, hey, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but when I get out of here, that's when I'm going to really start employing this. And what we say is, no, in your day-to-day walk, the time to make that happen is right now. And so, that means being a godly parent if you have children. That means being a godly spouse if you're married. It means making disciples. It means being salt and light in your community. And so we really focus in on those roles. The names of our programs are really kind of about the whole man. Certainly, we talk about family restoration. That's ultimately our goal. But we really try to engage the entire man or woman from a biblical perspective on what their lives should look like. And so our overall goal is to break the chain of generational incarceration, which, depending on the state, can be as high as 80%, the likelihood that a child will follow in their parents' footsteps. And so what we see from this over the course of the years is what we're calling generational incarceration really is generational sin. I mean, it's an epidemic that impacts multiple generations of families. And unfortunately, in some of their communities, actually many communities around the United States, the overflow of that generational sin really impacts entire communities. And so it's not outside of the bounds to go into the south side of Chicago or North St. Louis or take your pick of the city, talk to young people and say, hey, what does your future hold? And they'll say, hey, I fully expect to spend part of my life behind bars, because that's just the general atmosphere of the communities they're being brought up in. So we aim to break that by working with men and women behind the walls to really build them up and then be that leader, that catalyst leader in their family and in their communities.
So I find this really interesting. A couple of connections here. Number one, my partner, Emmett Mitchell, who is the CEO of the D.L. Moody Center, his brother and he worked with gangs in Kansas City for a long, long time. And one of the things he always talks about when he talks about his brother is that his brother saw promise in these young gang leaders. He's like, if they could only apply the leadership principles they're using in these gangs in a Christ-like way for the church, they would have this massive kingdom impact. And I think, many of us probably, because we don't have that window to that world, are sort of writing these folks off. We're not seeing the potential that they actually have to lead in community, to impact the community. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that, like these folks who are in prison and they're incarcerated. Number one, do you see an odd sort of leadership potential in them, given their experience, given their maybe even stature within the communities they come from, to reorient people to Christ? And then number two, I'm wondering, and this can be a follow-up question, but how is discipling people, which is maybe that's how you think about what you're doing, but that's how I sort of read it on the website. Discipling people in prison, how does that have its pros and cons? I'm kind of interested in that. So first question is, do you see a real unique potential for these folks coming out of prison to have a stature and a reputation and experience to lead within their communities that they might not have had had they not been in prison?
Yeah, so one of the things I guess I would talk about, and when we take a look at worldwide missions, one of the things that we have been witnessing is that the greatest amount of growth comes from the most broken, impoverished areas. I mean, when you take a look at third world growth in places like India and China and South America, where, I mean, you're hearing these crazy numbers of people not only making decisions for Christ, but the number of churches being planted. And you start to recognize that within this brokenness, it allows the Holy Spirit to move. And when people recognize in the depths of where they are that there's a Savior that came from them, they're just more open to responding to that call. Well, I've had the benefit of working with the urban poor across the United States, and what I could tell you is our poverty, as you can guess, doesn't really mimic what we're talking about in these other countries. And in fact, probably the biggest thing that replicates that level of brokenness is when those prison doors shut, and men and women kind of reach a point in their lives where I've had enough. I can't go any lower. This is the bottom. And so there's an openness to receiving the Holy Spirit that we might not otherwise see in the outside the walls. And so that is number one. It sets a great opportunity for us. Secondly, when a man or woman behind the walls decides to become a Christian, it's not an easy decision. When we're on the street, it's an easy decision. There's not really a lot of repercussions. Maybe in our family dynamics, we might get a little bit of pushback. But behind the walls, you have to understand there's gang pull. There is polls from race groups tie in with economics. There's just so many different things. And if one decides, hey, I'm going to avoid getting in those groups and become a Christian, all eyes are on them. And you don't get to fake it until you make it. I mean, like, they're looking at you and going, okay, is he pulling the wool over our eyes? Is he really following this Son of God that he claims to be? And so there's a genuineness that comes out of validity, if you will, in the faith walk that we don't necessarily see on the outside. When I'm teaching guys on a weekly basis, oftentimes I will tell them, hey, I belong to a wonderful, mature family group that meets every week and kind of like a Bible study group. And I belong to a Sunday school group that is just mature believers, and I love them. But the reality is, at noon on Sunday, I don't know what their walk looks like. I mean, like, they could leave, and whereas in this community, they're living it out each and every day. Now, don't get me wrong, they're making mistakes, but they're recognizing what that looks like. And so it just sets, a different tone. And one of the things that we deeply engage these guys with and gals is that God does not make mistakes in creation, that everybody is wonderfully made, even those behind bars. And so often we hear the the mantra, if you will, of it took me becoming in prison for me to find freedom. And that freedom it comes from Christ. And so in these folks walk, you know, they just that's what they needed for that wake up. But God has a ministry, they've been called um, for the things that we're talking about in their roles, but sometimes they've been called for bigger things. And so what I would say is that in the redemption story that is these people's lives, what greater value that they have to talk about where they have been, the depths of where they have been, and but then be able to testify to the work of the Holy Spirit to where they are now. And sometimes those stories just outlive anything that we can experience outside the walls.
You talk about that, and it's one thing learning to live sort of within that more isolated community of the prison,
Hmm.
right? Where you have my vision of it, at least. I've never been, so I don't know it well, but my impression is that you have a fairly set schedule, that you're fairly isolated, you're interacting with the same general group of people. Life is relatively uniform. And how does that translate when these folks get out of prison, where life is a little bit more contingent and
Yeah.
like you have a lot of randomness?
It can be difficult. Yeah. I mean, oftentimes when these guys through our program and through other ministries, when they're really and I'm going to get to your question, but I just want to preface it with
No, it's
this.
great. Yeah.
They're really becoming building trust because they're starting to unpack some of their vulnerabilities, which in prison, is typically a no-no. These guys are starting to unpack these things, and so there's healing from sometimes trauma. There's healing from past misconceptions, what the world has told them, what a man of is supposed to look like, or what a woman's supposed to look like. And so through that and unpacking these things, trust starts building. And what ends up happening is with that trust, you start getting a body of believers. And these men start relying on one another. And that impact, breaks down other affiliations that they may have had coming into this, including gangs and 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 other groups. And so when these guys are fully engaged in that Acts 2 types of church behind the walls, it's kind of like a cloister. I mean,
Yeah.
similar to monks. I mean, they're wearing the same clothes, they're all eating at the same time, they all live in cells. I mean, there's a lot of correlation. So when these guys get out into the world, it can be difficult. We try to urge in our rollout of our curriculum and programs, wherever we can, we try to engage the local church to help facilitate our programs. It is so crucial because for many points. First and foremost, we're called as a church body to reach the incarcerated person. And so we provide a great on-ramp for churches to do that. So oftentimes churches might have the mindset of, well, this doesn't really affect our community. And
Right.
and and oftentimes I'll say, hey, you know, ask from the pulpit who's been touched by this, and you'll be surprised at how many people have been touched in their immediate family or extended family by incarceration. So it's crucial to get the local church involved for that reason. It's also crucial because as as a parent, raising children in today's world is extremely difficult. Even if you're home every night and you're able to engage them regularly, how much harder is it for these guys who are trying to have that same level of impact from behind the walls? And so that's where the local church comes in to be able to provide assistance and be able to not only reach the man or woman that they're ministering to, but really be a place where the family can come and find a like-minded community.
Yeah.
And then certainly the last thing is that when these guys, um, studies have indicated that when men and the study only indicated men, not women, but when men are engaged in a local church while on the inside, they have those relationships built, and they're essentially met at the gate, meaning that they have a community waiting for them on the outside. Recidivism numbers, which are over 70% in most states, recidivism numbers go down to single digits. The likelihood that
Wow.
guys will go back. So the church plays a huge impact in helping these guys, transition. Uh, and certainly you got things like job and where they're going to live and getting license and social
Sure.
security cards and so on and so forth. But I'm just talking about just the keeping the accountability, keeping the community, and so on and so forth.
That's an unbelievable drop from double digits to single digits.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty
yeah, it really
crazy.
is. It's the
Wow.
power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you addressed the role of the church with the families on the outside, because I sort of wondered how that worked. I mean, maybe describe the process you guys go through. Obviously, you've got Malachi Dads and Hannah's Gift that are working with the people in the prison. But then you have some other things that sort of help bridge the gap between the folks who are in prison and their families. Yes?
Yeah, so one of the things, so Lifeline Global, we have an enormous footprint. I mean, we're active in 35 states, we're in 22
Yeah.
countries. Last year, we reached almost 15,000 men through our online availability on e-reader and tablets, which are now becoming commonplace in prisons and jails. We're reaching
Really?
about 40,000 visitors every month that are, I mean, that and what's miraculous about that is that when you're using e-reader and tablets, there's no way to market, to hey, visit this site and here you can find this. So that
Right.
just is a testimony to uh, incarcerated people searching for family restoration
Hmm.
arbitrarily and how much need is out there. Um,
Yeah.
but um, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to ask the question again because I
No,
got
it's okay.
myself
Bridging between,
sidetracked.
no, it's okay. I'm sort of fascinated by the tablets in prison. I didn't realize that was a thing. I mean, I think it's awesome that people are just finding you more organically. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But no, the question was how the sort of restoration process actually works. Like, let's say somebody comes out of prison and they're reuniting with their families, or they're in prison. How do they retain a connection with their families?
Right.
How does that work in general?
Yeah. So where I was going with that is that while we have this enormous footprint, we intentionally stay small with our administration to force us to work with local
Yeah,
ministry, local churches, local chaplains. And the reason we do that is because it's just a sustainability thing.
yeah,
I'm calling you from Wichita, Kansas. So certainly I have, uh, I care. I was just in Louisiana last week. I care what's happening in Louisiana and every other state we're involved in. But I really care about what's happening in Kansas because this is my backyard. This is my community. So when
yeah,
we engage locality, we find that people often, are able to dig in a little bit deeper. What we try to do is be a tool on the tool belt of local ministries. So again, we have these products that we know each of our ministries, Hannah's Gift and Malachi Dad's, is a set of four different studies that can be taken independently or be built upon one another. That focuses on what it looks like to be a man or woman of Christ, what it looks like to live into those roles, and what are family restoration, what are biblical reconciliation practices that in turn lead to family restoration. And then from that point, we're largely relying on the man or woman that is getting trained to then engage their family and start that process. And certainly it looks different for everybody. I mean, some have a great relationship with their kids and some have never met their child, and their child is now 33 years old and
mm,
has grandchildren and whatnot. And everywhere in between. Um,
yeah,
and so we also have a kind of a graduation event that we call Returning Hearts. That's why I was in Louisiana this last week. Returning Hearts is an event that really celebrates the work that these, in this case, the men at Angola State Prison, that the men were putting in, and it allows them to engage their children for a half day in a safe, fun environment where they can build on that reconciliation process. They can share the love of Christ and really start the movement um, towards restoration. Separately, on the other side of the facility, we have an event for the guardians because
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily just because the man or woman that are taking our curriculum, it may not be being received on the other end. And so the guardians
Yeah.
may be in a different spot. And so we love on them and teach them about the things that we're going through. What I would say for our partners nationwide is that what we just did in Angola last week really is a showcase of, hey, this is what it can look like. But oftentimes our partners, are just having smaller ceremonies and smaller graduations. And sometimes families are invited. And so everybody kind of does their own thing. One of the nice things
Gotcha.
about keying in on locality is everybody knows their institution and what works and what doesn't work. So, what we've celebrated last week with Returning Hearts is again a showcase type event at its high point. We've been on a 5-6 year hiatus due to COVID and coming out of COVID, so we hadn't been back since 2019. But at its high point, you're going to have 175 to 200 inmates participate. You'll have 500 children show up, and it takes 500 volunteers in order to make that event happen. We've got people from all over the country, just like we did last week, who fly in to make that a short-term missions volunteer event.
At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than money. It's a way to support the people, causes, and community you love. Because helping you put your faith into action is at the heart of what we do. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at thrivent.com.
Wow. I think it's great you do something with the Guardians. I mentioned before we started recording that my wife and I've done foster care for a while. And I think one of the things we've struggled with is not fully understanding what the biological parents have gone through. We sort of get the, if you will, the negative end of the stick. And that's not to say anything disingenuous about the parents. But the reality is that oftentimes we're dealing with the problems that the parents have sort of left aside, not the children,
Yeah.
but the actual problems, right? And so we're trying to put some things back together. And so there's always a little bit of trepidation when we're, in the process of saying, okay, this child should go back to their parents. We're really trusting a system to have done the work that needs to be done so that when this child is given back to the parents, that it's going to be a good situation. And I can only imagine that you're doing that same thing with these folks who've been guardians to these children. Now a parent is coming back out of prison and they're kind of sitting back saying, yeah, but we've done a lot for this child over this time. How can we trust
Yeah.
that this person is going to be a positive influence in their life? How can we trust that this person is not going to ruin some of the good work we're doing? And you can see how there would be feelings of resentment that would kind of creep in there. It's a difficult process, and so I'm really glad to hear you do something with the Guardians as well.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, one of the things, the process of the way that Returning Hearts works is that the children arrive in the morning with their guardians. They get checked in. This as part of our security protocols, we have to have a family assistant, a volunteer with every family unit. So the inmate father or grandfather or uncle,
Yeah,
can engage with those kids, but there's always
yeah,
somebody there. Um, but what happens is the family assistant then takes those children to an area where there's an MC, and the dads are all sitting waiting for their children to arrive. And it's the most powerful ministry. I've been blessed to be able to do ministry all over the world, and I
yeah.
can tell you that I've never been so moved by this event time and time again. And what happens is that the child, the name is called out for the dad, and the dad comes down and engages the child.
Mm,
And from a worldly standpoint, when we look at these men, in this
yeah.
case, we see murderer, we see rapist, we see thief, we see assaulter. I mean, take your pick on the crime.
Right.
Oftentimes, these kids, they just see daddy.
Yeah.
And the reunion, in some of these cases, these guys have not seen their children in years, if ever. It's touching. If you're a parent, you're just sitting there going, man, this is so wonderful, this engagement. And at the same time, you're overwhelmed by the tragedy that this is even having to take place. And then what you see is the disparity of the children depending on their age. They age out at 18. And so
Okay.
you're getting children from all 5 to 18. You're getting children of all ages. And there are kids who are, man, I've never met this guy before, and I'm really apprehensive because, I've been told of stranger danger, and that's what this guy is.
Right.
And so, their eyes are wide open, and hey, I've just been dropped off. And fast forward, you might have multiple children and have a son or daughter that's older, that the kids are engaging dad, but the son or daughter's had to live into that parent role,
Mhm.
and they're very
Mm.
protective of their siblings. And the
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
kids are going and they're hugging dad and they're loving on him, and the older kids are like, stop, we don't have that kind of relationship. I'll shake your hand, or so on and so forth. If you can imagine a few years back, we get kids that come all the way from all over the state, and we had a bus come from New Orleans. We had a 5-year-old child who was put on a Greyhound bus in New Orleans and showed up at the event by himself, 5 years
Wow.
old. He didn't know his dad's name or anything. I
Right.
mean, he just showed up, and I mean, I don't have that kind of courage. But the day ended up going out well, and he ended up getting to know dad and so on and so forth. But had never met, again, didn't know his name or so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And in the environment that he was in, whoever the guardians were felt comfortable. Yeah, we're just going to put him on this bus, and we'll look for him when he comes back. And that's outside of what I'd be comfortable with. But those are the types of stories that we encounter all the time.
Does your curriculum address those issues, or do you think that the men and women who are incarcerated, that they have a decent enough sense of what maybe they could be expecting when they're doing that and reuniting? Like, how do you prep them for that moment, whether it goes good or bad? How are they framing that, do you think, as they are sort of reunited with their kids, reunited with their families?
Yeah, so we do in our curriculum, for example, for men, we spend 24 weeks on what it looks like to be a godly man. We take a deep dive into Timothy and Titus, and we take a look at the definition of the overseer, and we really apply that to what it looks like to be a man of Christ. And
Okay.
so in those, we break down all the key components of what that looks like: patience and sobriety, and take your pick. And then we spend weeks, breaking down each one of those and delving into it, and then applying it to their past life, and then applying it as well to what they would like life to look like moving forward. And so through that time, they're reaching that, they're getting that coaching process. And the expectation is that while in some cases at Returning Hearts, men are meeting their children for the first time, the expectation is through our program is, hey, you're starting to build that relationship or re-engage that relationship while you're going through this program.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and certainly that looks different for everybody. Sometimes, we have plenty of inmates who have court mandates that they're not even allowed to write their kids. I mean, they're just, hey, you can't.
Okay.
And so we encourage them to write letters and just save them. At some point, we know that
Hmm.
they're going to age out. The kids will age out. And we want those dads to be able to say, hey, listen, I've been praying for you and I wanted to write you, and let me show you, and that helps with the dad as well. Just really try to
Yeah.
fully understand the impact, and so one I would say is that they kind of get that through every class of what this looks like, and certain
Yeah.
dads
Yeah.
sit from the get-go and some wait till the last minute. What I would tell you is that I talked about that greeting of the child to the dad and how emotional that is. The only thing that's even more emotional is at the end of the day, we release balloons as a metaphor of that brokenness no longer being there through the work of Christ, as well as the redemption in a new relationship with the family. And then those kids are exited out. And I mean, you see some
Mm.
really big, hard guys that otherwise you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley, and they're balling. I mean,
Yeah.
it's tragic. I mean, it really is. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to spend the next 20, 30 minutes just crying with them and put my arms around them and just saying, and for some of these men, it's at that point where they fully understand the consequences. Like
Mm.
prison, all the years in prison, they still weren't getting it. And when they finally have gotten a chance to spend this fun time with their children and love on their children, and then their children are then gone again, they
Yeah.
fully understand the consequences of where they are. And so, that sometimes is the spark that really gets that dad to say, you know what, enough's enough. I'm being the dad that God called me to be.
Hmm.
At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than money. It's a way to support the people, causes, and community you love. Because helping you put your faith into action is at the heart of what we do. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at thrivent.com.
You talk a lot about, and maybe I understand this, maybe I don't, so correct any misperception, but my understanding is that there are a lot more men sort of per capita
Oh,
incarcerated than women.
yeah. I mean,
Uh,
I'm not getting statistics, but it's probably, 9 to 1, you know.
wow. Okay. I my and maybe this could be a misperception too, but I'm interested to understand. I would think that as a man, it would be easier to reintegrate into a family than it would be as a mom. And I think in part, like I watch there'd at least be I mean, this is almost trivial to say there'd be a difference, but I watch the way my wife bonds with our foster kids. I watch the way my wife bonds with our adopted daughter. It's very different than what I do. Um, it's not that I don't love the kids or anything like that, but as more of the, stoic disciplinarian and that orientation that I sort of bring to our family anyway,
Right.
the rough hours of the player, I can almost see it being more easily reintegrating back in than a mom that really does do more of the nurturing and the loving and the caring and just has a different way about that. Do you see that as your sort of the difference between reintegrating moms and dads? Am I making that up, or is there something real there? Is
Yeah,
there a
I would
fundamental
say,
difference?
yeah, I would say that it's situational. I mean, there's
Okay.
never
Yeah.
like one case that looks like another. So, for
Yeah.
example, sometimes we're looking at dad who's been incarcerated for 3 years. He went in when his son was 2. His son's now 5, and he's kept communication with either his wife or the baby mama or whoever,
Yep.
grandma. And so there's maybe that situation's easier. You have another dad whose kids are adults now and they've been out of their life their entire
Yeah.
time. And those kids know their dad is drug addict, bum, uh, non-child
Right.
support payer, one who made their mom cry. And all of a sudden dad re-enters the picture and says, hey, I have found Jesus Christ and I want to be a part of your life now. there are some kids who say, "Hey, I've been praying for this," but there's a lot of kids who are like, "Hey, where you been?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't you haven't," and so there's a lot of things to overcome
Mm.
uh, on the male side of things. You had talked about kind of the provide discipline and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
If you haven't been there to do it in the past, it's kind of hard to exert that leadership
Fair.
all from behind the walls.
Fair. Yeah.
From a mom's standpoint, you know, not all men, but most women, studies have indicate most women that are incarcerated have been touched or have been impacted by trauma. And
Okay.
so whether or not there's been whatever that trauma looks like, there's been a lot of things that they've been wrestling through as women in their own lives. And it's hard to kind of determine what type of parent they were previously, or where they're coming
Sure.
from with that. I can tell you that a few years back, I was at a graduation for Hannah's Gift, and one woman gave her testimony, and she said, in taking this program, she said, I've recognized that I was not a good mother. She says,
Mhm.
my girls are adults now, but she says, when they're grown up, she said, because of my life choices and my addictions and so on and so forth, I just really wasn't there. I was gone. I was checked out. And she says, but through this program, she says, I'm getting reintroduced to my daughters. But what's the blessing is that they're allowing me access to my granddaughters. And so
Mhm.
this is a new relationship that now I
Yeah.
can engage my granddaughters. And here's where it really hit a pivotal tone. She said, I really got hit between the eyes when I was talking to my daughter, because my daughter let me know. She said, Mom, every instinct that I have as a mother comes from doing the opposite of what you would have done.
Mhm.
I mean, can you imagine hearing that? I mean, as a parent and saying,
Yeah.
I really, but then the daughter came back and she says, but I want you to know that I pray that I can be the woman of God that you are today. I mean,
Mhm.
that's that. So, the daughter is older. She never really had mom as part of the house, but
Yeah.
now she's at a point of over time of reconciliation, and that we hope that, you know, while we want to see transform men and women in our ministry, the impact is really felt in the next generation or generations to come. So
Yeah.
we're hoping that through our ministry that these men are impacting their families in a way that their sphere of influence is putting people on a different trajectory than what they had been through the previous generations. So, and everybody,
Yeah.
that just God's story is different than ours, and it happens differently with everybody.
What do you see as the bigger challenges? Working with men and women in prison is one thing. Helping them reintegrate into society through a local church partnership is another.
Mhm.
What are some of the barriers you think that a local church who might be thinking about getting involved in your ministry or who might be thinking about getting involved in a similar ministry, what do you think they ought to be thinking through as they do this? Some of the maybe the pinch points that local churches tend to go through as they're delving into ministries like this. Are there any sort of hot topics that you think they ought to be addressing, before they go in for eyes wide open moment for them?
Yeah, so one of the things, we're a member of um, Christian Ministry and Chaplains Association, which is kind of a
Okay.
third party entity that engages anybody involved. Prison ministry is an extremely broad topic. So, I mean, you're
Yes.
dealing
Yeah.
with drug addiction, you're dealing with reentry, as you mentioned, you're dealing with family restoration. So, we kind of all collaborate and try to develop best practices and share our ministries and break down the silos. But we just conducted a research project, and And in the research, we wanted to really test what church engagement looked like. Where does the church think it is nationwide when it comes to prison ministry? And what we were surprised by as members of the CMCA in the results is how many churches feel like they're engaged in ministry to the incarcerated without necessarily indicating how. Just, hey, oh yeah, we're kind of doing this or we're kind of doing this and so on and so forth. And what I would say is that from the vantage point of the people doing ministry on the ground, the church is largely disengaged from this mission field. And oftentimes it's in our society, unfortunately, and in our church society, it is still really kind of the whispered sin. The church has been very open in addressing things like abortion, pornography, sexuality, divorce. We're willing to talk about those things from the pulpit. But when it comes to incarceration, largely it's still in hushed tones. The members aren't bringing forth the fact that they're being impacted by that, or the pastor's not talking about, what's happening in their locality. And I would say oftentimes pastors that I talk to, their responses, like, as I mentioned earlier, is that really doesn't impact our congregation, or that really doesn't happen in our area. And what I would say is that we've got 2 million people that are incarcerated. And in fact, we've got plenty of states that if you took the top 10 developed countries besides the United States and combined their total incarceration, we have plenty of states that have more people incarcerated in their state than the next 10 developed countries. And so we have a responsibility to kind of live into that. And there's a missions field that we're called to do. In Matthew, Christ says, hey, when you reached these other guys, you reached me.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I've been part of sermons where I've heard pastors utilize those same verses, and they stop short. Hey, we're willing to talk about the widow. We're willing to talk about the impoverished, but we're not going to take it all the way to the incarcerated. And part of that is because, again, people don't feel like it affects them. There's some that are they don't feel like grace applies.
Yeah.
Recognize that in our ministry, we're not talking about sentencing reform. We're not talking about, changes in the laws or so on and so forth. What we're talking about doing is reaching men and women for Christ so that God can utilize them to be the catalyst of change in their family. We're not talking about whether or not, hey, they're justified to be released, or we're not making any proclamations on that. So, there's just a lot of things that the local church that we would just ask, man, take a look and see, what this looks like and how you can engage this. And because there needs to be more, because the problem is getting worse. We saw a little bit of drop off with COVID protocols, but now since COVID's ended, we're seeing these numbers rise again. And, there's just a lot of work to be done.
It's interesting. So I live in a military town, and I had a guest on who was talking about being a military wife, and she worked with military families all over the place. And one of the things she mentioned that the local church could do is just a little thing like, hey, why don't you go and offer to watch the kids while the military wife goes and gets groceries on her own? Just something small. Give her a break from the kids. Let her just go out, get things done. Like, it doesn't have to be anything big. But she said people don't realize the impact of those small little things. And I think the underlying assumption that we ended up talking about a little bit on the episode was that most of the people who are dealing with these kind of situations, whether it's a spouse who's away on military duty or whether it's a spouse who's incarcerated, aren't actually sharing the burden that they actually have. They may not even be able to articulate this. And so to think that this isn't impacting any given local congregation, I think it's kind of crazy given, but there's somebody in the orbit of someone who's incarcerated at the very least, even if it's not, one of your congregants who has gone to prison, right? Which maybe that's what churches mean. But I think that there's a broader ministry there that's really crucial and important, and that most of us, including me, wouldn't understand. I don't have any context really for what ministry to prisoners and prisoners' families looks like. And I think that what you're articulating there may be interesting that churches feel like they're involved. I'm wondering if they just start being overly optimistic, or, they don't really understand the depth of what needs to be done.
Yeah.
What's your read on that?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to a Rotary group in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a while back, and the crowd was made up. I don't know the religious background of those people, so obviously I'm
Sure.
assuming I was talking to some people that were Christian and some people that weren't. But what I talked about in this case, and trying to engage their involvement in their city jail or their county jail or their state prison, or if they have a local federal institution, was the impact of them getting involved, the impact that was having on society. And I said, because regardless if you believe in the work of Jesus Christ, you are so impacted by your tax dollars, as more I mean, if you take a look at the
Sure.
stats of what it costs to incarcerate somebody in these facilities and so on and so forth, the overall impact on community relations, where, there are targeted areas where, a lot of these men and women, reside from, whether it be, reintegration, I mean, there's only so many people that are spending their entire life behind bars. Most are getting released back into society. And so, the overall impact to society is huge. What I would say is that there's tons of opportunities, and one of the things about our curriculum is that it is designed to be facilitated. We're not looking for teachers. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great if we have a teacher, but you don't need to have a PhD in eschatology in order to come in and reach our guys. And in fact, I teach on a weekly basis at my local institution when I'm not traveling, and it's just really a men's study. I mean,
Sure.
and here's the thing: what we're talking to these guys about, unfortunately, we're not getting right on the outside. I mean, that's the crux of it, is the things that we're talking about on the inside that these guys need to do is continuing to break down on the outside. And so we seem to be regressing, especially as men. I mean, if I could be honest, as men, we seem to be regressing on what our godly role is supposed to be. And so when I'm taking these guys through the classes, I'm as impacted and affected and take the learning lessons from it as much as they are. So, there's just there's a lot of, but maybe it's not something that's weekly. Maybe it's something that is monthly, or as you talked about, maybe it's reentry on the outside. Maybe it's supporting ministries like Angel Tree, which have these nationwide rollouts that, it's not necessarily localized. For us, it costs us almost $32 to reach one man or woman with our entire curriculum. $32. We underwrite it all. We're a donor-driven organization. We underwrite it all, and so for your listeners, I mean, certainly we would love if you're not inclined to necessarily get involved with support of actually doing the ministry, help support, the work that's being done to support that kind of ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. That's extremely low cost. I mean, I wouldn't have guessed it's that low. That's amazing. Well, how can people get involved? I mean, now we're kind of toward the end of the episode. So how can people get involved with Lifeline Global Ministries? What are sort of the different levels of involvement you can have? You talked about giving. So, $32 to support, giving to the
Yeah.
ministry would obviously be helpful. What are some of the other things that people could do?
Yeah, so you guys, hopefully those that are watching can see our website there, but our website is called lifelineglobal.org. And we intentionally make our website very intuitive to answer the question that you're asking. And in fact, when you click on our website, there's a tab there that says Get Involved. And it will tell you, hey, here are opportunities for you to do just that. If somebody is called and says, hey, I really want to know what's happening in my backyard, we provide the contact information. Hey, let us know where you are, and we will try, if we're aware. I mean, we have partners that, are doing ministry that sometimes we're not even aware that they've been
Yeah.
active. Um, uh, if somebody says, hey, I want to start a group in my backyard, or I want to start, I feel like God's calling me to this. What would that look like? We have a whole sheet that you can click on that really kind of gives step by step instructions of, hey, this is what it should look like. And one of the reasons, like I said, we exist is certainly to get our programming out there, but we then undergird what we try to do with as much support as we can to make you successful. So whether it's myself, again, we're we have a huge footprint, very small organization. Myself or one of my coworkers will get on the phone with you and say, hey, how can we help you make this happen? And it's not just to get started, it's for whenever you're doing ministry, moving on down the road. For those that say, hey, you know what, that's too much of a commitment. I want to do something maybe just to kind of introduce myself to it. We do a returning hearts function, as I just talked about, that we just did this last week
Yeah.
at Angola State Prison. And so that's an opportunity again to come really experience what the end of that looks like. And um, there are plenty of other opportunities with other ministries. We want, if I can say this, we really want people to be engaged in this ministry. And if that works with us, praise Jesus. If it works with somebody else, praise Jesus. So there's a lot of opportunity. But you're welcome to contact us. Like I said, and in there is plenty of contact information where you can reach out to us with questions and so on and so forth. And we're here to help that process along. And then likewise, if you want to help us financially, there's an opportunity to do that right from the site, or to mail a check to help underwrite the cost of what we're doing around the country and around the world.
That's awesome, man. I will put all that information in the show notes. So folks, if
Great.
you didn't grab it, lifelineglobal.org is where you're going. But
Yep.
that'll be in the show notes, and we'll put links to the various things that Romney mentioned here in there, and just give you an opportunity to engage with this. I'd encourage you to do so. I think one of the, and it's not exactly the same, I realize, but I think being involved in foster care has really opened my eyes to a variety of different things, and it's given me a different perspective on my faith, different perspective on the Bible and theology. And those verses about, caring for the widow and the orphan really start to come home a little bit differently. And so I would just encourage you to recognize that these are things the Bible talks about that we should be doing, that we should be reaching out to the prisoners, that we should be reaching out to those who need our assistance, and that it's a fantastic way to witness to Jesus Christ, to disciple these men and women who are incarcerated, and who really are separated from the people that they love. And so I just encourage you to get involved with lifelineglobal.org, at lifelineglobal.org, Lifeline Global Ministries. Romney, thanks for being here, man. This is a fantastic ministry. I don't know whether you have any parting words, but I'll give you the last word, and then I'll close up the episode. Anything left you want to say to folks?
Yeah, I'm going to make a big God statement here because I've had an opportunity to see just how genuine men and women's faith are behind the walls,
Mm.
and seeing the stories of what that looks like, and sometimes how difficult it can be to live that out, that faith walk. I really feel like the next revival in the church in America is going to come from behind bars. I mean,
Wow.
we have seen
Yeah.
some things that have it just people wouldn't believe. And I'm going to share this last story here. It happened down in Texas. A chaplain friend of mine shared a recording, and the recording was from 7 a.m. to 7:20 a.m. every day. One section of the prison would open up a cappella and be singing praise and worship songs every day, 7 days a week, time and time again. And you can hear these men singing. You had Christians and non-Christians and so on and so forth, all joining in. Nobody was organizing it. Somebody would just start singing and all these guys would join in. But you can hear it echoing throughout the walls of this facility.
Yeah.
The section next door would hear these guys, and at 7:20 to 7:40 every day, they would pick up once these guys left off. And then a third section did it for an hour every day between these three sections. Men's voices are singing praises to the Lord on high. I mean, it gives me goosebumps to even think about. So it's for those reasons that I just ask your listeners to really trust in what God is doing with the incarcerated, because it would not be too big a thing for him to cause the next revival from those folks.
That's amazing, Romney. Appreciate you sharing that story, and just appreciate you being here today, man.
Thank you so much for the invite. It's been a pleasure to be here. Enjoy myself.
Yeah, I love the ministry. Really love the conversation. And for all of you who have stuck with us, check out everything in the show notes. Again, lifelineglobal.org. If you want to get involved, if you want to donate, just encourage you to do so. It's all in the show notes. Check those out, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Thinking Christian. Thanks for being here, everybody. Take care.
Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Hey there, it's Nicole Eunice from the How to Study the Bible podcast, and I'd love to invite you to join us as we weekly discover a passage of God's Word together. From beginning to end, from principles to practicals, we are here to make sure that God's Word is powerful and relevant to your life. If that sounds like something you're looking for, I would love to invite you to subscribe. You can go to lifeaudio.com and search How to Study the Bible, and we'll see you there.